One of the ways energy is wasted in society these days is in older homes because a lot of the homes that were built 50, 100 years ago were built with archaic, outdated systems that waste a lot more energy than they should. For instance, I look at the appliances I have and the appliances we had a couple of years ago. You look at what they consume and what they used to consume, it's a whole lot different. So today on GreenTech Pulse, we'll be talking with someone whose field is making these old homes more energy efficient. We're talking with Robert from GreenSavers. So welcome to GreenTech Pulse, Robert.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here, and any opportunity I get to talk about, how to make homes better and introduce buildings into the 21st century is time well spent in my book.
Amazing. So can you tell us how you got to doing this too?
Sure. Yeah. So about 18 years ago now, I was working with a friend of mine who was into a lot of what I would say maybe alternative construction methods. So this was primarily in new construction, but was building like SIPS panels construction. If you're familiar with that, it's styrofoam and the
Oh,
OSB plywood on the sides, or straw bale homes, or uh, insulated concrete block homes. So these kind of alternative methods, and using spray foam, 20 years ago, that was still, um, you know, I'd say on the cutting edge, at least in some spaces. And so, and using heat pumps more and more often. So there were these technologies and these methods and these concerns about air sealing and large insulation values that were getting applied to, I would call it, these kind of niche buildings. Not everybody is going to live in a SIPS panel home,
yeah.
but nonetheless, the technology is cool, and you can get some impressive results. So he was involved in those kind of jobs, and as we hung out more, we were trying to figure out how we could build a business that really focused on this kind of thing. And also, what was happening right around that time in the United States, 2007, 2008, is the housing market was just crashing. You
Yeah.
know, the new construction housing market, just the floor fell out of the market. And so very quickly we started thinking, how can we take these technologies and apply it to existing buildings? Because the new buildings were evaporating. There were no new starts happening. And we said, hey, but there's all this good technology. How can we apply it to existing buildings? And that's really the question that has led us down the path that is the kind of foundational question of GreenSavers and how we got to where we are today, where now we have offices in two major cities in Oregon, both in Portland, Oregon, and Bend, Oregon, and we're retrofitting almost 1,000 houses a year. We have a big team. We have about, or I'd say mid-sized team, 65 to 70 individuals out there retrofitting these homes, and we're doing a large volume. But it all came from that original question of hey, there's better ways to do things. How can we use those methods and technologies and apply it to these homes that are 50, 100, 150 years old?
That's actually really, really old homes. So now when you look at these 100, 150-year old homes you're talking about, what are the most common issues you see in them, especially in terms of insulation and the like?
Yeah. So I would say, right off the top, the lack of insulation, right?
Mm.
So when you get into a home, at least in Oregon, built before the 1970s, the chances are that the walls are not insulated. So that's a huge opportunity. Now, of course, that is labor intensive work because you typically have to take off siding. You have to drill through a sub layer, whether it's sheeting or some kind of lap board to get into the wall cavity. Um, so there is definitely labor in just prepping the area before you can actually start blowing or dense packing the insulation. But that's a big opportunity. Another one is the kind of hazardous materials that were used in insulating, 50 years ago. We run into a lot of asbestos. Typically, that is either in vermiculite, which it was a kind of loose fill insulation that they used, and a lot of it has a asbestos content to it. Also, they used asbestos wrap around ductwork, the ductwork that brings the hot and cool air from your heating and cooling system and distributes it through the building. There's a lot of asbestos there. So when we're working in these older homes, both dealing with old hazardous materials is part of it, and then obviously bringing in more insulation, updating some of the infrastructure. Electrical infrastructure is another problem. There's an error where it's a wiring called knob and tube wiring, where you have porcelain knobs and you have a wire wrapped around that. It was common here in the 1920s and 30s, and it's a fire hazard, and you don't want to insulate over it in an attic space, especially if there's a lot of splicing. So we have to remove that old wiring and put in some new Romex before we can insulate in an attic that contains knob and tube wiring.
So when you talk about changing the wiring, drilling into the walls, all these things, a lot of these houses have the character, they have the look and all that. So how do you approach this challenge of trying to do these upgrades, do these improvements on these houses, maintaining the look, maintaining the character, not damaging the houses while improving their efficiency?
Yeah. Luckily with the insulation, I think we're pretty darn good at it, actually. We can typically remove the siding, whether it be lap siding or cedar shake or different types of siding, and then put it back when we're done. Sometimes we have to source rare sidings, and we go to our bespoke miller that can make this siding that isn't commonly used these days. But for the most part, we can remove things and put it back, and then maybe with some paint, we can touch up, and you never know that the wall now has insulation in it. So for the insulation, I think we're pretty good. Where it is more common to have an aesthetic change is window replacement. And when you start replacing the windows, most likely there's an aesthetic difference there. I think a lot of times you can get the new window with the mullions and the grid patterns that look old, and for the uneducated eye, they won't even be able to tell the difference. But there are, depending on the neighborhood, there are historic districts that have pretty tight rules around this. And one of the things that they don't like to see is window replacement. They would rather you do these painstaking retrofits to the existing window and take out each pane of glass and then put in a double pane of glass. But it's a balance because that might be more true to the aesthetics, but when you're putting in a pane of glass, one pane at a time, it is not going to have the same air sealing um, uh, factors that a new window built in a modern factory would have. So I think there's a time and a place for that kind of detailed restoration. I can imagine a very important historic house wanting to do that kind of painstaking restoration. But I think in the most average person's home, even if it is an older home, you can do just spend a little time up front with the design, picking a window that is going to match pretty darn close with the existing scheme, and people will be very happy with the results.
Okay, so now all these changes you mentioned, and I think that there are lots of them. You talk about the windows, the wiring, the insulation, and all of them. When you look at a typical older home, what are the most impactful changes? What are the changes that make the biggest difference in the energy efficiency of a home, of those older homes?
Yeah. So dealing with the lid of the building, so this is the attic space or the ceiling, the highest point in the building, making sure that that space is insulated well and air sealed well. So when I say air sealed, that means you don't want air being able to sneak out through cracks around lights or around ducts, or you need it. A good analogy, I think, is in colder climates, you wear, a insulating jacket, like a puff jacket, and then you wear a shell on the outside, which stops the wind and the rain. And that is similar on a good attic assembly, has the air sealing. That is the shell to reduce the airflow back and forth. And then you have the insulation, which is the thermal break, which is the puff jacket. So you need both. So insulating an uninsulated attic is a huge game changer. And similarly with the walls, if walls are uninsulated, insulating them is huge. And then once you have a shell that is well insulated, then we recommend coming in with the modern mechanicals, the modern heating and cooling system. And this is what we install at GreenSavers is a inverter driven heat pump. And these heat pumps, basically, if you think about like gears in a car, they have huge amounts of gear. So they can gear way down and just put out a little heat, or they can gear way up and put out a ton of heat. And with those heat pumps, depending on climate zone, they're doing full capacity to 5 degrees, sometimes even -5 degrees.
Well,
Um, so and that's Fahrenheit. Um, that is a huge range of functionality where the heat pumps in the old days, right around freezing, around 32 degrees Fahrenheit, they would start to trail off and you would need a backup heat source.
yeah.
Now, modern heat pump can go all the way down to, 5 or in some cases -5, which just really impress. You just have a great output from that piece of machinery.
Okay, yeah, I had no idea this inverter, there were inverter-driven heat pumps because the air conditioner I have is inverter-driven, and the way it works, it can actually work with a very small power source compared to the ones we had back in the day, where you needed a power source with a huge surge to handle the compressor and all that.
Hmm.
Yeah. So now these older buildings, is there any retrofitting or anything needed to make them work with these more modern heat pumps, or are they just plug and play in these buildings?
I mean, like we already talked about, Peter, the insulation is key because if the building is not insulated, at least in this environment in Oregon, the heat pump is not going to be able to keep up. So you do need to work on the shell of that building. Make sure you have a nice insulated, air sealed shell before you install the heat pump. The other part of this is the wiring, is the electrical infrastructure. Um, and this is, some folks around here might only have an older home might only have a 100 amp panel, and these heat pumps, they're branch circuits that they run off, especially the bigger ones are 50 amps. So that can be a decent amount of capacity that just that heat pump needs. So we do find ourselves working in the electrical infrastructure to make sure the existing panels can handle the load and have space in that panel for the double breakers required. Also, the service, what's coming from the utility, needs to be upgraded in some cases so it can handle the extra demand. These are things that need to happen to be in a place where you can do the heat pump. But the good thing is that these things also need to happen if you are planning to charge an electric car.
Yeah.
So if we are in a conversation and we can help plan with a building owner what their future looks like, and are they going to have one electric car? Do they think they might have two electric cars? Or we can start planning their electrical needs for the next 5 to 10 years and do it all at once. So yes, do the infrastructure for the heat pump, but be ready for those electric car chargers. Be ready maybe for battery backup if that's going to be in the future. Heat pump water heaters, solar, like our earlier conversations, like all these things, yes, are going to need to tie into the building's electrical system, but we can have those conversations and make sure we do it all in one shot.
Okay, so now everything you described about, especially the weatherization process and everything, it sounds very labor intensive, which would be expensive. So, how do you help homeowners understand the return on these investments? Most likely, a huge investment they're going to make on this process.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. There it is. It is not it's not like buying a new TV, or unfortunately the investment is more serious than that, and both on the side of like the planning and the thinking that needs to be in to go into it, but also in the financial side. And so I think there's a few different tactics that we use to address the financial hurdles, and some of them are the one, financing, right? If there's a way to disperse these costs over time, in a lot of these situations, your utility bills are going to be lowered enough that they can either pay for the financing payment or at least make a substantial dent in that financing payment. So, if you're if your electric bill and your gas bill is gonna, reduce $100, and your bill and your financing bill for this work is $120, then net, you're only spending $20 a month.
Yeah.
So so that's one way. The incentives right now, there are a decent amount of incentives, both locally, from the state, from the federal government. So there are from the utility. There are organizations in Oregon that are trying to encourage people to do this work. And are willing to either help out with tax credits or utility based incentives to make it a little less expensive. Um, I also think that technology is is moving in a direction where a lot of the um, best upgrades over time are getting cheaper. So this might not be the same, with the, like you mentioned, the real labor intensive parts of the work are not getting cheaper because in general, labor is not getting cheaper. But as we all know, in the green space, like for instance, solar, solar has dropped in price. I don't know, 3x or something. You can get probably three times the size array and that you could 15, 20 years ago for the same costs. So I think that's a big one. And I'm hoping, there are some concerns on the horizon around tariffs and so forth. But if you take that off the table for a minute, the technology itself is getting more cost effective. And I think about that with batteries as well, battery backup, and with being able to use electric cars as potential battery backup. That technology is getting more cost effective year by year, decade by decade. So I think there are some positive signs in the outlook that you're going to be able to do. At least you're going to be able to do more with the same amount of investment dollars. I think that's what it comes down to.
Okay, so I think for the energy bills, can you share maybe some before and after examples of energy bills after maybe a home carried out this process?
Yeah. Um, so if I don't have any case studies at my fingertips here, but I do have some some references in my mind that stick out to me, and some of our big wins. In homes that were heated with electric resistance, this is typically cadet space heaters on the wall, radiators on the wall, electric radiators, electric baseboard. Though in a lot of those situations, standard electric water heating as well. That's pretty common around here. We can cut those bills in half. So, it obviously depending on the size of the home and how many occupants and their behavior depends on the cost. But just I would say an average electric resistance heating bill for maybe 2,000 square foot house in this climate could be $300 in the winter. And we can cut that down to 150 with the heat pump and some insulation. So those kind of results are the ones that pay for themselves. When you can cut a bill in half, you can your return on investment, your IRR in that project is really good. Um,
Yeah.
so that's great. The solar, and then as you reduce your load, of how much electricity the building is drawing for heating and for water heating, then you design a solar array that can do that much more, right? So now, if the solar array might be able to contribute to your transportation, to the to powering your electric vehicle, where before that those same electrons had to go to heating your inefficient water heating system. Now they can actually go to powering your car, and you can start seeing a reduction there as well. In Central Oregon, the electric rates are fairly cheap, and if you start comparing the fuel that you're putting, like gasoline compared to electrons for your car, your car is costing something like 10 to 20% of what that same trip would cost using gasoline. So you start braiding together a few of these things: an efficient house, a solar array with electric charger, and you're reducing your gasoline consumption. You're reducing what you're using from the utility, and you are starting to see some serious cost savings.
Yeah, and I think with the cost savings, I think I'm an example because before we started, I was talking about my inverter going bad on Saturday, sent it out for repairs on Saturday. So from Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I've been using the petrol generator. And you won't believe that I've spent about 10% of the cost of my inverter just on petrol
Yeah, right.
in four
Yeah,
days.
that's crazy. Yeah,
In
I
four
mean, look at
days.
that. That there you see, Peter. You have your own case study right there.
It's crazy. So now, for an older building, someone who owns or lives in an older building, what are some warning signs that they can look out for to know that their home is not efficient? It needs to be upgraded.
Yeah, that's a good question, Peter. Where my mind goes when I'm talking to somebody, and they're asking these similar kind of questions, trying to understand whether a project makes sense at their place. So one of the things I ask about is utility bills, right? So that's first. Do you have high utility bills? And of course that's relative, but in that conversation, you can start to understand if your utility bill is high and why. So high utility bills, comfort issues. If if there are drafts in your home, if there are rooms that are less comfortable than others, if there are different temperature gradients between upstairs and downstairs, or one bedroom and the kitchen, those kind of gradients typically speak to a building issue. So comfort, health and safety things. If you're seeing a lot of, if you're battling a lot of moisture issues like mold and organic growth, some people I know are like, oh, I have to repaint this bathroom ceiling every 3 years because the organic growth, pops through the paint and starts growing on the bathroom. Those kind of issues. That is not only a ventilation problem, but probably a dew point problem as well, which is interrelated to insulation levels. So I think those kind of health and safety, high utility bills, and comfort issues would all be signs to me. And then just the error your home was built. If your home was built 50 years ago, it probably needs insulation help.
Yeah.
And if your home was built 20 years ago and you haven't replaced the heating and cooling system, one, there's a good chance that it's going to be, that it's going to break down pretty quick, pretty shortly. And two, there's a lot better systems being manufactured today. So by the error of the equipment you're using and the error your home was built, you can also get a sense of like, hey, these windows are 35 years old. I wonder if there's better technology out there today, and there probably is.
Yeah, so I think you look at when your home was built, the health and safety issues. You look at your utility bills and also comfort, the level of comfort in the house. So now, for homeowners who are not ready for an all-out upgrade, like you're mentioning, but they want to get at least a little bit more efficient, energy efficient in the house, what are some DIY things they can do to at least get a bit of results?
I think the air sealing one is a good one where homeowners can make an impact. And this is leaks, drafts. So typically the most important is up at the top of the building, as we talked about.
Yeah.
So if you have can lights, you have ductwork, you have exhaust fans or attic accesses, other things that penetrations in your lid. I think those are areas that one you can either air seal maybe with a caulking gun and apply caulking, or weather stripping. The stuff you can go to the hardware store and um, get some weather stripping that applies around doors or hatches. I think attic hatches is a big one. And then similarly down below grade, there's an effect that happens in buildings. It's called stack effect. And it's basically how a chimney drafts. And this is that hot air rises and goes out the attic, and it sucks cooler air in
Mm,
from underneath. So when you are going for a building's envelope and trying to tighten it, you want to tighten up top and down below to work against that stack effect. So after I was done up top, I would go into my basement or my crawl space, however I can get underneath my house, and I would look for penetrations down there. Again, sealing up. You can use foam. There's the expanding foam you can get at most hardware stores. That's a good product. And then caulking and weather stripping and other products. So I think that would probably be the number one thing for the envelope. I mean, there are things like depending what kind of light bulbs you're using, if you're still using the old school, um, standard light bulb, the
yeah.
LED is obviously recommended, right? And then, of course, depending how handy you are, I mean, there are some of these upgrades like heat pump water heaters that I think are within the realm of handy homeowners. If you work on your own vehicle, you could probably, uh, if you change the brake pads on your car, you have tools, you're comfortable working with your hands, then you probably could change a water heater as well. So I think there's a spectrum here of upgrades, and there's some really simple ones like changing light bulbs, and then air sealing, and then maybe changing your own water heater.
I smiled when you talked about the light bulbs because once I installed solar for the first time in my house, that's when I realized how much these light bulbs are consuming. I had these older light bulbs that get hot. They were like 60 watts, some of them 100 watts. And because the inverter would read, when you turn off the light bulb, it goes up 100 watts. I'm like, just a bulb? It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
crazy.
it is. It is. Yeah, I know. It is amazing. You start paying attention, and
Yeah.
there's opportunities left and right, and you didn't even know before. But if you start paying attention, then yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Okay, so now for owners of older homes, we've talked a lot about the attics and all that, the drafting, the insulation and everything. So, is
Mhm.
there any advice that you would like to leave? Maybe someone who's living in a 150-year-old home. Any advice you'd like to leave with them that we haven't talked about yet, but you feel would be important to them?
So I would say for advice, I would say start thinking about how long you plan to stay in the home, right? I think that that's a key variable. Um, what you how you envision your life 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. That helps inform decisions. We already talked about on the electrical infrastructure side. It definitely impacts that. I think it impacts. We have this conversation with a lot of our clients around cooling, because in the past, in this environment, a large, probably the majority of homes didn't need cooling, but now that's changing, and people want more and more cooling every year. There's more people who are interested. So I think that's one. If you were on the fence about cooling now, think 5 years from now, are you still going to be on the fence if the area continues to get hotter, or are you pretty confident that you kind of want it now, you might as well plan for it? So
Yeah,
that's a good one. Heating, I think another one that we see, especially in rural areas, is when folks are younger, they do a lot of heating with wood or with pellets, things that take manual labor to do. And then as they age, that is less appealing, right?
yeah.
So again, thinking about how you're going to live in this home 10 years from now, 20 years from now, are you still going to want to heat it with that wood stove? Because if not, we can get you air conditioning right now and the easier way to heat by installing a heat pump. Um, so I think that's the main advice that I would give, is that think about how you're using your home today and how you want to use it 20 years from now. And and maybe there's some possibilities that you're not even sure exist, but with some research, I mean, obviously at GreenSavers, we help facilitate these conversations all the time. But I think even without a trained person in these areas, the internet, right? Listening to a podcast like this, you are going to learn about what the possibilities are. So start as you learn about those possibilities, how do they integrate into your building, into your most important investment typically? So that's the pre-work that the average homeowner should be doing, so that when they start talking to contractors, they already have an idea of where they want to go.
Amazing. So think ahead of what you want to do. So now for listeners who have listened to this, they've enjoyed this episode, but they want to learn more, they want to connect with you or anything else. What's the best way they can reach you?
So the best way would be through our website. We're going to have a ton of we have a ton of educational material on that, where you can browse at your leisure, right?
Yeah.
And and go deep on a bunch of different topics. So I think that's probably the easiest and most convenient any time of the day, 24/7. Also, reaching out via email. Hello, we have on the website there. We have email addresses, and then social media. If that is your thing, we want to be able to interact with folks on all channels. So website is probably the best resource, and then email and social media.
Okay, so the website, greensavers.com, email, social media, the website will be on the screen. It will be in the show notes once this episode goes live. So thank you so much for coming on GreenTech Pulse today.
Thank you, Peter. It was a pleasure to get to spend some time with you. I love hearing about what you have going on at your house. And in this case study, this great case study that you're engaged in. I think it's pretty cool that we can be, an ocean apart. I don't even know how many time zones, 10 time zones, some crazy amount, halfway across the world, and yet still be sharing the same advice and education and learning about our buildings and how to set our buildings up for the future. We're both involved in the same journey, and that's pretty cool.
It is, and I've learned so much talking with different people on this podcast, and I think that this is the best thing I've done this year, if I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so. Yeah. So for the listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did, listen to the other ones that will be out with this one, and till next week, bye for now.